First of all, I'm Trent Garrison. I'm the former president of Kentucky Academy of Science, and I'm the chair of Education and Advocacy Committee. And our Education and Advocacy Committee is the one who hosts events like this. And our committee, we meet every 2 weeks on Wednesdays at 12:30, I believe, and we talk about science policy in the state of Kentucky. And we review bills, which is very exciting to do for those of us who are interested in that sort of thing. There's a lot going on right now for those of you paying attention in the Kentucky State Legislature. There's lots of bills, some good ones and some really bad ones. So if anyone here is interested in joining us, just let us know. You're most welcome. We would be very happy to have you. Speaking of being very happy to have you, we're happy to have you here today. I think this is a really important workshop, and the fact that Kentucky Academy of Science has gotten more involved in advocacy work and science policy work the last 3 or 4 years has been a really good thing, in my opinion.
She is the founder of Until Justice Data Partners, and she has recently been recognized by the Union of Concerned Scientists as a science defender. So a most welcome speaker today on an issue that's getting more attention in Kentucky as well as across the country. The federal government has placed a stronger emphasis on environmental justice and created positions and parts of government to focus on that issue. So an emerging issue, and we've got a distinguished speaker here to talk about her work in that field. So I will turn it over to Monica Unseld.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. And again, apologies for the switch on the agenda, but I'm a biologist by training. That's what my doctorate's in. And then in 2016, I believe, I went back to get a master's in public health. The reason I did that was because as a biologist and a biology professor, I was teaching about environmental problems. I also saw that the textbooks were written by some of the companies that were making people sick. So for example, they were saying nuclear energy is green energy. And we know that it's not. It also takes an abundance of water, and we often store it in sites that are sacred to our indigenous peoples. So prior to going back, there was an organization in Kentucky called the Kentucky Environmental Foundation. It's now something else. But at the time, that the director, Elizabeth, oh no, her name's Elizabeth, but I forgot her last, Elizabeth Crow, sorry. She found me as I was a professor and asked me to join their board. Then she said, do you want to go to Albuquerque? And I was like, free trip? Sure. I went to Albuquerque to meet a group called Coming Clean. So the address is comingcleaninc.org. This is a collaborative of about 140 groups, predominantly grassroots groups who are in these neighborhoods and communities that we call frontline or fence line communities. So they're near chemical facilities, they're near landfills, they're near contaminated water sites. All of these things, they're getting the brunt of climate change and toxins in their bodies. They use me as a technical expert. So they would first send me out to do interviews because I have the initials behind my name, that the news media would believe me, even though I was saying the same things communities were saying. Then they decided to teach me advocacy and policy. That work, it may be fun to some, I love doing it, but it's not fun to me because the EPA doesn't know how to write very well. However, I have been on an EPA committee. I am now doing some work for the National Academy of Sciences to do some advising on chemical screening methods and new methodologies to test to see that chemicals are safe. I wanted to make sure that people understood that in this work, unfortunately, there's room for all of you. So there are scientists like myself who are known, my name is known, my face is known. We also have scientists who are underground. Why? Because they make good court witnesses and people will think that they're objective, right? Me, they know what side I'm going to pick. I'm going to be anti-Exxon. With these scientists, they can come out and say, this is the problem. And some of these experts include people who have been pressuring the military to do something about PFAS for years. And I want to just mention that it's not just the military that we're concerned about PFAS, it's firefighters, it's the communities around military bases where we're having higher incidence of cancer. The Camp Lejeune lawsuit, which I'm sure you've seen a lot of those commercials, we've known about that for years. But for decades that people were getting sick. Unfortunately, it just takes time for the government to finally do something about it. However, if we had more people, if we could put more pressure on the media to cover these issues, if we could put more pressure on legislators to tell chemical companies and the military no, we would save a lot of lives, because also our troops are getting sick from PFAS. So on the subject of PFAS, and then I'll get to the rail director, I work with several experts on PFAS, like the science of it, and also on removal. And at the end of the month, we're meeting with a group of Canadians who reached out to us to see if we could help them figure out some ways to lower or mitigate PFAS exposure in Canada. So that's one of the great things about my job, is that I get to be a science nerd, so to speak, but I also get to go to many places. And like I said, the conference I was at last week, Timor's was a sponsor. I was looking for the guy because I wanted to have a chat with him about PFAS and how he could sponsor something called Green Biz when they are spreading PFAS all over the world and just putting absolutely ridiculous amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere here in Louisville, Kentucky. Now, it's important when you hear about greenhouse gases to know that when you have greenhouse gases, there's always a co-pollutant, and those co-pollutants are your toxic chemicals. So you can't tackle the chemicals without also addressing climate change and vice versa. I did want to briefly speak on the train derailment in Ohio. We're also working on that with some experts, and I've actually talked to someone at the local paper here in Louisville. For years, we've called them bomb trains because we know that they are very hazardous. These trains are not just going through Black or brown communities, they're going through all of our communities. They're going through our nation, they're going up and down the continent. How many of you knew that climate change can warp train tracks? Did you know that? So there's going to be more derailments because when the heat hits, the metal expands, and then when it cools down, it can't go back to its original shape. If you look online, there's some pretty wonky photos of some very wonky train tracks. So that's going to cause more derailment. High heat temperatures could also just cause some of the flammable chemicals in these trains to just ignite. So it could be passing your home, passing your child's school, or if there is like an incident of West Louisville, there may be a train car parked behind the fence behind your house. The problem is, because of proprietary information, we don't always get to know what's in these cars. A few years ago, a train caught fire under a tunnel in Maryland. Firefighters couldn't put it out until CSX finally gave them the information about what was in the cars. So firefighters are breathing in these chemicals while it's burning, and then they also can't put it out because CSX is not picking up their phone. Or if they pick up their phone, they're like, no, or we'll call you back later. And then the fire has to burn underneath a city. I think it was near Maryland. I think it was near the harbor, but I'm not sure, but I know it was in Maryland. So that's another risk. So I'm really not sure how to sum up this work in 15 minutes. I want to leave room for questions, but I will say my work has led, so we were part of the group that got Johnson & Johnson to pull talc baby powder off the global market. So MSDS sheets, they're not as helpful as one might think because they're often used very limited data, very limited studies. So they may tell you in general it causes inflammation, right? But then sometimes because our regulatory authorities depend so much on these industries to self-report, and they do have proprietary laws, that means they don't have to, they may not put the material safety data sheet on there. And if the train's blowing up, you can't find the sheet. In Canada, a tanker full of fossil fuels blew up an entire town. So there are so many levels from who's regulating this, who's checking the train tracks to see if they're warped, Why are we carrying these chemicals? Why do we need these chemicals? Some of these chemicals we don't need. We've just been told that we need them, like PFAS, right? So are these chemicals just, they come out of something where we were trying to make this chemical and then, oh, PFAS got into the mix because of some chemical reaction. Or we decided that fighting fires this way was no longer the way we want to fight it. So we're going to give them some foam and put these chemical things on it. And then we're going to go ahead and test it on people in the military and spray it around bases. And then there are test subjects on like what PFAS can do. And when they speak up, they are told that there's nothing that's going to happen. And it will take decades and decades and death and cancer and cancer and cancer for something to get done. We do anything from local policy, state policy, federal policy, and corporate policy. So that's, again, I wish I could have met the man from Keymore's, but I do have his contact information. And I'm just trying to calm down to make sure that what I say will not be too offensive, because he's literally poisoning my city and people all over the country. They're the ones putting PFAS everywhere. So I don't know, Rob, is there anything else you would like me to say? I wanted to be sure to hit on those two topics, but my career really has taken off after I left academia and decided to do more advocacy work. That's how I got on the EPA panel to advise on the screening methodologies. That's how I got onto the National Academy of Sciences Committee, where we're looking at new methodologies. This is how I was invited to Green Biz. And it was all because of community support. The communities trust me. They know that I'm a scientist that believes in usable data, actionable data, open data, accessible data, those sorts of things. So I will tell you that if you want to do advocacy, you will have to unlearn some very harmful academic habits and learn to be a partner or a servant and not a hero. And be willing to say that that objectivity is a myth. And you need to be able to say things like lead should be banned, asbestos should be banned, PFAS should be banned, instead of just continuing to do studies and studies and studies when the question's already answered. So how's that, Rob?
Absolutely wonderful.
Thank you. I didn't get home until like 12:30 last night off the flight. So
Yes, Dr. Unseld sent me a message last night, a little bit before 9 o'clock, saying she was getting ready to board a plane to come back to Louisville. So appreciate that after a whirlwind of travel, she made time to be with us. Appreciate that much. If anyone does have a question, you're welcome to either ask or put it in the chat. We'll take a moment to see if anyone does. And even if the meeting moves on and you have a question, go ahead and ask it. We can always follow up after meetings through emails and make sure questions are answered and information is delivered. So thank you so much, Dr. Unseld, for taking the time to speak with us. And we're now joined by our next speaker. As Trent mentioned before, Representative Nima Cole Carney is with us. She's been in the House of Representatives since 2019. And I think for a lot of lawmakers, perhaps for state lawmakers, perhaps the first discussion they ever heard about PFOS chemicals was brought about by Representative Cole Carney, as she sponsored some bipartisan legislation last year, a resolution to create a PFOS Awareness Day with Republican Representative Kevin Bratcher of Louisville. So glad that Representative Cole Carney has taken the time to join us today to talk about the work she's doing and why we should all take an interest in an upcoming PFOS Awareness Day. So Representative Cole Carney, over to you if you're ready.
I am. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes. All right. I apologize. I had some technical difficulties. Well, good afternoon, and thanks for inviting me and being here and talking about this very urgent and very important topic that very few people are aware of. And outside of academia, outside of folks that are working with these types of chemicals, and or outside of the folks that are actually creating and disseminating these chemicals in our environment. Those are the only folks that have any awareness really of what PFOS is and why we should be concerned about them. I have been in office since 2019, and I filed, I believe starting in 2020, a bill, simple bill, to just monitor and regulate PFOS in our drinking water. And that was almost immediately met with pushback from the water company, from different industries. And actually, Rep. Bratcher was a primary co-sponsor on that legislation, and sat with me as we talked through various stakeholder concerns and things like that. And he got a ton of pressure on his side. I'm in a super minority in the state house, so it's not like I have the numbers or the votes necessarily to pass something like this on my own. So we need majority party buy-in. So it's got to be a bipartisan effort. But he got a lot of pressure. So he backed off of the bill itself. He is willing to continue trying to raise awareness of the dangers of PFOS and the prevalence of PFOS in our environments, because he's viewing it like we view lead today, right? And he's viewing it on as extensive and as significant a health hazard as we view lead to be today. It got the same kind of pushback from industry. It got the same kind of just lack of awareness when people were first proposing that lead was dangerous and that we should not have it in our paints, in our gasoline, and all of these products that we were exposed to every day. And it took years and years of very consistent, concerted effort to get any changes there, because it was always dismissed, out of hand. No, we're fine. The levels, it's always about the levels. The levels are fine. We're within the minimum requirements, whatever it is that is required for our industry. So it's essentially the same types of arguments that we're getting. And I have, filed this bill again just to monitor and regulate PFOS in our drinking water. I have discussed this issue with our agricultural community, stakeholders in our agricultural community, including universities, including farmers. I have a healthy soils bill. I have a couple of different sort of conservation related bills that I'm trying to get, again, bipartisan support on. And PFOS is kind of a through line in all of these, right? In our air, water, and soil, because it's everywhere. And there's different concentrations, and we need to be studying how it's getting into our ecosystem, where the concentrations are, how is it getting into our food supply, how much are we ingesting on a daily basis. And so I think that bill is getting a little bit more traction. I have found that consistency, again, regularity, just having people hear about it over and over again moves the needle forward a little bit. I mean, we're not going to make huge, significant changes now, but if we lay the foundation and we lay the groundwork, once change has been decided on, it will happen very quickly, and it needs to happen the right way with the right stakeholders. So that being said, I have House Bill 197, which just would make those levels statutorily mandated, right, in our drinking water. And just minutes ago, I got a fiscal impact statement where this would significantly impact our division of water and water company and things like that, because there's no infrastructure in place. They've never had to monitor, regulate, or remediate on any PFOS related matter. So there, again, has already been pushback. Rep. Bratcher is willing to help again with PFOS Awareness Day, which is something that I think is equally as significant as any legislation that is filed, because awareness is the only thing that's going to tip this into action, moving from conversations that will likely become more and more circular to people learning enough about it and constituents becoming concerned enough about it to talk to their own representatives and their own senators and say, look, you need to do something about this issue, especially if they have a chemical plant, especially if they have some industrial facilities in their communities that are causing higher concentrations of PFOS, and they're not even aware of it, right? Nobody knows what's happening because nobody's required to monitor it, even in our drinking water. So that is something that I, have been speaking with Rob about, that I think it's vital for our younger generation to get involved in, just the awareness of it, just informing themselves, informing their communities, their parents, their neighbors, their friends about what is PFOS and why is it so important that we figure out a path to eliminating the production of PFOS and cleaning them up in our communities. And it requires a lot of different layers of study and analysis in terms of concentrations, in terms of the types of compounds we're talking about. But this is like a lot of things that you're going to hear about, an issue that's got to be led by the younger generation. And frankly, younger generations that live in rural parts of Kentucky. Those are folks that you're not necessarily going to hear a lot from. They're more likely than not to have never heard of this issue. And so it's something that I know is an important community because they're very highly regarded, right? We've got 120 counties in Kentucky, and the vast majority of those counties are rural. And there's already issues in different counties about not having safe drinking water. And this is just an added layer that people need to be aware of, especially when they're spraying our food with pesticides, when they are planting in soil that's been contaminated at levels that are unhealthy, which is basically any level. So people need to be aware of how this is getting in our food and our water. So PFOS Awareness Day is something that I had talked with Rep. Bratcher about in an attempt to get our younger folks involved, and it's for middle school, high school, college level folks doing different things, right? It could be an essay, it could be an art contest, and I want this to be disseminated throughout all of our school districts. So not just, I'm from Jefferson, for instance, so not just JCPS, but school districts all around our Commonwealth, so that we can have a display and we can, recognize and congratulate winners of those contests, but also make sure that legislators in Frankfort know that these are kids from their districts that are building awareness of PFOS and that they need to be paying attention and supporting and encouraging these efforts as opposed to ignoring them or working against them. So PFOS Awareness Day, I think last year it was March 4th. March 4th is a Saturday, I believe, this year. So we'll likely do the resolution that week before. I just looked at the calendar, but we'll figure out the date. And ideally, what we want is to have this be an annual thing, an ongoing thing, have the display at the Capitol be larger and more well attended by legislators. So that is something that I know will have likely growing bipartisan support. I have already heard from stakeholders, mainly because I've been talking about this for the past few years, right? So you just keep talking to folks about it and making sure they understand, and just, I forget whatever the adage is, but you just keep working at it, and you will move the needle forward, even if it's so people, if they don't want to hear from you anymore, they'll give you what you want, which is not much. What we're talking about is not much. Even the bill is not much. It's just establishing a level of monitoring and regulation. PFOS Awareness Day is just something that we want folks to look at what their communities are doing in terms of understanding and educating each other about what PFOS are and why they're dangerous. So, that's really, these are low-hanging fruit kind of initiatives, and I'm hopeful that folks on this call, folks that Rob's talking to, all of our school districts will get involved with this, and this will become a bigger and bigger event in Frankfort every given year until we have kind of reached a critical mass of support to where we can actually move forward on statutory changes when it comes to PFOS in Kentucky. That's about all I have. Rob, is there anything that I touched upon or didn't touch upon, or certainly happy to answer any questions that anybody may have.
I am just hopping, like, I can bring in the troops.
Okay.
If you want, we're literally, like, I've got experts in PFAS. We're meeting with a group of people from Canada at the end of the month about their efforts. I've got people in other states who are working on it. Yep. So if I think I sent you my chat, but I'm excited in a good way because I'm thinking I know people who can help. And this is a lot of justice work, is like sometimes you just know people who can help, and you take what one state did and copy and adjust and adapt. So if you want I can provide them your information, or I could have them contact you, or however you would like to do it. Fact sheets, research, studies, advocacy, bills. How do you go through a state that's not California? Because we're not California, we're not New York. So yeah, so I'm bummed about PFAS, but I am excited that I can get you some support and we can
Yeah.
rally the troops. And of course, I'm here in Louisville. So I can also assist as well, but I love collaboration. It's the best.
No,
Okay, yeah,
this is a team effort. I will be reaching out to you.
yeah,
And there's an organization that I have been working with for legislators. So it's National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, which has been super helpful also in terms of, it's nonpartisan. They just do policy and research and provide support on that level. But there are a lot of groups, right? And there are a lot of states that aren't necessarily California, that maybe aren't quite as, red as we are. But this is now becoming a bipartisan thing because the stakeholders have changed. The people that this is impacting has changed. And so I think you will see conversations around PFOS because people are seeing it in their communities. People are getting sick. People are ingesting unsafe quantities of these chemicals, and it's having impacts in places that people weren't expecting impacts. So I think that any collaboration is going to be crucial. This is a team effort and it's going to take a while. But the more we work together and the more we work consistently towards this goal, I'm very encouraged by the momentum that even this has had, even in Kentucky, right? No, and Rob, you were right. Like nobody had ever heard of PFOS. I mean, people's eyes just kind of glaze over when you start talking about compounds, and there's thousands of them, and they're here and there and everywhere. And then it's like, well, if they're everywhere, then that's it. That's the end of the story. We can't do anything. They've already, it's already in our air and our water and our soil. But there is obviously a deeper, more nuanced conversation that needs to be had about health outcomes and health impacts. And that is something that people are, as legislators, you can't ignore. So I appreciate that, and I'll be reaching out for sure.
yeah. And the reason I'm clapping is because I'm sure, as you know, like this work can burn you out very quickly, and you can feel extremely hopeful, especially when you're going up against industry or the Pentagon. But we've been talking about PFAS long before it came up, and nobody would listen to us. So the fact that I'm hearing this, I'm so excited because that means that like people are coming together, and it does take a long time, but once you know you're not alone, that's a game changer in a mindset, an absolute game changer. And I did want to flag for you in terms of chemical testing, we're also looking at the new alternative methods called NAMs. They can look at mixtures, but they're trying to replace animal research, and nobody wants more animal research. The problem is they're not ready. And so NAMs right now show lead is safe. And we already see the chemical industries dipping in at the EPA, trying to rush NAMs through to declare chemicals safe. And PFAS is going to be one of these chemicals that they're wanting to test with these NAMs so they can declare it safe. So we're fighting in on that front too, as of saying NAMs are not ready. On the science and like the justice side, like it really is coming down to lab rats or people who's going, unfortunately, but that's really what it is. But I wanted to flag that, but I also wanted for the students to see that these are how these collaborations happen. I don't know how the people in Canada found me. I don't know how the people in Wake Forest, Georgia found me. But once they know, so like she knows, I know she's a legislator that gets it. So I'm going to be in her ear and like probably sending you stuff that may be a couple years before it hits the press. But I won't send it to you if I can't get you back up to do it.
This is an excellent conversation,
Yeah.
and I just wanted to acknowledge the questions in the chat. And Dr. Unseld, you mentioned this, you kind of answered it already in the chat, but for people who may not have seen it, Brian had asked, hey Brian, how's it going? Had asked if there's a cheap testing kit that can be purchased to test for PFOS, and you kind of addressed that already, but either one of you, do you want to elaborate on that?
I don't know that there's any accurate or reliable cheap PFOS testing kit. And I don't know if Dr. Unseld has any other comment, but there isn't really, and I have really only focused on it in larger systems like our wastewater, drinking water, that kind of thing. I'm going to be looking at soil concentrations. So there is no sort of cheap testing kit for those types of systems that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I'm unaware as well, but I will tell you our stance on this, like for Until Justice and the Coming Clean, like the 140 of groups, is that it's not the community's job to test for this. Because we don't want you waiting around in rivers that may have a higher concentration. We may not want a spill on your kitchen counter if it is from a source that has a higher concentration. And the reality is the burden should be put on Chemours and other companies to prove that it's safe. So we can't say precautionary principle because that triggers lawsuits. So we could say a precautionary approach, which says the producers have to make sure it's safe and the producers have to clean it up. And if, heaven forbid, there is a disaster, you can't get out of it with just a check. So we don't just say like it's a check because people want to feel home again. If you don't want to move, you shouldn't have to move because there was a huge PFAS spill, right? And just writing you a check is not going to make up for everything you lost from moving your community or your neighborhood because there was a PFAS spill or because everyone was dying. I see a hand up. Oh, Brian.
Sorry, yeah.
I just wanted to ask, and I completely agree with what you're saying, that we need to make sure that we hold the people that are producing these products responsible. But it's been my experience that 9 times out of 10, change comes from the bottom and goes to the top, not the other way around. So that's the reason why I asked about the testing kit, if there was a cheap way to do that, because until we know that these substances are present in our environment, I'm not sure exactly how we're supposed to take an activist stance against the production of them, because I mean, as we all know, until it affects people, nobody really cares. And until we can prove that these substances have affected people, I'm not sure that we can mount a huge change against it. So I'm just interested in your perspective.
Well, there are universities and private labs that are testing for it. So that's another reason we may not need at home, because like in a university, you have techniques, you have, PPE, you have all of those things to do it. So we do have data on where it is. We know where it is for the most part. We'll probably find more, of course. However, at least until 2024, we have some EJ activists and advocates in the White House, not Biden and Harris, but like on WeJack and influencing things. And I know this because these are my colleagues and friends that are on WeJack that are directly helping Biden decide to release all of this environmental justice funding. I see Cassie, but those are the things that we want to do. The universities are doing it for at least 2 more years. You've got people inside, but also we don't want to normalize communities doing the work. Cassie?
No, and real quick, sorry, let me just also answer that. I think that's a very important point. There is no reason for individuals and communities to be doing this testing. So one of the first conversations I had and have continued to have over the past several years is with universities and with university funded organizations that are studying this on their own and getting this data. And it's made up of scientists, and that's their job. Right? They're the ones that are coming up with ways to test, where to test, how to test, what to test for. And so they are looking at linking these concentrations to health outcomes. And that's exactly, Brian, what you were talking about, because just throwing a number out there where if you're operating under this level of parts per trillion, those will change. I mean, the EPA didn't even have a roadmap until 2019. They've been saying they're going to come out with whatever guidelines and recommendations. They have not done that yet. A lot of the industry pushback we're getting is that just wait for the EPA to come out with their numbers. But of course, the numbers don't matter. I mean, even if they come out, they'll be outdated. As soon as they come out, they'll be old and irrelevant. And not helpful, right? Not helpful to the communities because there are no safe levels. So it's really misleading to say if you're operating under this level, you're fine. Everyone's fine. You can drink the water with no consequence. Like that's just not true. And it's something that these industries can kind of hang their hats on, but it's not helping anything. And so the EPA guidance is what it is, and they're free to do it. You know, on their own timeline, there have been studies in Kentucky about PFOS concentrations in our water systems, in our fish, and everything is way above even whatever the EPA was recommending. And they were recommending like 70 parts per trillion drop down to like 0.004. And so clearly there is a recognition that the numbers that they were using are incorrect, inaccurate, and harmful, to say the least. So I think that universities are crucial to get this data, right? And I think in terms of grassroots activism, what you're going to have to do is have people reach out to their legislators and say, here's a level, or here's a plant. And my kids are sick. My cows are dying. My water is killing me, right? I was diagnosed with something, and we just think it could be on any level. I don't know if you all have seen that Dark Waters movie with Rob Bilott, but I had a screening done at the Speed Cinema, which used to be in my district. It's no longer in my district, sadly, but it's just down the street. So I'll claim it anyway. And had a panel discussion, right, with Rob Bilott and with a couple of other filmmakers on this particular issue who are also working on PFOS in different communities. So Kentucky, I think there was one in Alabama. And so that there's different levels of activism, there's different levels of awareness building, but there is one aspect of why this is important to communities and why our lawmakers and policymakers need to be aware of exactly what they're dealing with. And on the other hand, you have all of this research that needs to be funded and supported and widely used by policymakers and lawmakers and activists and everybody that will be an accurate picture of what kinds of PFOS, where the PFOS are, and what can we do to remediate or mitigate them. Part of which, of course, is holding producers responsible. But if everyone is shrugging their shoulders and saying it's not my problem, that's kind of where we are right now.
Thank you all so much for a great discussion. We've still got a couple issues brought up in the chat that I want to give a chance to offer some information on before we move on to our next speaker. One issue in the chat asked about the status of PFOS legislation in the General Assembly. So I think I'm correct in saying that it has been introduced, but has not yet had a committee hearing. So it's at step one in the process. Is that correct, Representative
Yes,
Cole Carney?
that's correct.
The other issue I wanted to touch upon in the chat mentions some recent news that Kentucky is going to receive $22 million from the EPA to manage forever chemicals and other emerging contaminants found in drinking water. So the question is, what all do we expect $22 million to do for us, and how can scientists get involved? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So the first thing, oh, sorry.
I was going to say, like, just wanted to clear out that a lot of this money is coming through and it's going to universities and it never reaches the communities impacted. So we need to keep an eye on this money to make sure it is going directly to those communities, and those communities are a part of any research and solution. So, because that's not happening right now.
No, and typically what will happen is it'll go, right, the federal money will come down to existing state agencies and existing departments. And so that may never get to not only the communities, but it may never actually get to the kind of work that they're earmarked for. So that is, and it's very difficult to track the money. Nobody wants anyone to know where the money is or how it's being spent or when it was spent or anything like that. But yes, we are supposed to get that. We should already have it. And so one of the things that I'm trying to make sure of is a really complete understanding of where every dollar is right now, and what the plan is, because it's going to go right to our cabinet, energy and environment cabinet. It's going to go to the Department of Water, if that's where they focus on. And the thing that concerns me in a lot of the conversations I've had is that there's sort of this immediate focus on, okay, PFOS equals bad. How do we get rid of it? Without any of the middle steps of figuring out where or how much or what kind, which is crucial if you're going to talk about how do we get rid of it, because you can't just sort of jump to the end. The concern is that this money will just go to some sort of effort somewhere, and it'll all be spent because everybody keeps talking about also how expensive it is. So if there's new methodologies or, whatever the methodologies are that people are aware of, and of course, there are new ones coming out every single day as people try to fix this on their own, young scientists around the world, right? And so it's not just us in this boat, it's everywhere. And there's a lot of innovation that's happening by people that are a lot smarter than me, thank goodness. And they're going to come up with some methodology that is going to be the thing, but we don't know it yet. And I just don't want us to get stuck in a place where it's just this one prescribed thing when that thing is already, outdated and inefficient. So, and I wanted to point out that Cassie has had her hand up for a while, so I'm going to stop talking and make sure that she has.
I feel bad. I love all of this. I just, mine was more of a specific comment / question, but, and you might have mentioned this, my attention's gotten pulled away a couple of times, but with the Palestine, Ohio spill of the vinyl chlorides that's happened pretty recently. So I'm from Northeastern Kentucky. So a lot of people in Ashland have been talking about that. Is that something that I assume probably PFOS are probably also in the spill, just because it was, I know a lot of PVC contains PFOS anyway. But I know the people of Ashland City had to put out a statement because people were worried about their drinking water, even though it was states away, and it's because of contamination in the Ohio River. Is that something that either of your organizations or your platform has been taking advantage of to get sort of the people of Eastern Kentucky talking? Because I know Eastern Kentucky is the victim of a lot of environmental issues, but they just oftentimes don't want to go against them because of their stance on like coal is good because it brings jobs and stuff like that. So I didn't know if that was something that you guys had been using as a part of your platform.
We've been looking into the fact that some of the water companies downstream, including here in Louisville, have been so quick to say we're going to be fine, when reality, we don't have the testing methods to know if we're going to be fine. We don't know what symptoms to look for to tell our healthcare providers that we'll say we're fine or we're not okay. And since you mentioned the jobs, I think this is a really bad habit that Kentucky has. There's a reason a lot of these companies bring their jobs here, is because they can get away with poisoning us. We've got Western Kentucky kids wearing respirators at home because of HIP facilities. They're using horrible chemicals to process it, right? In Eastern Kentucky, we know, right? Every job is not a good job. Our state doesn't seem to get that, Democrat or Republican. And I think that's a narrative that needs to change, is that there needs to be a just transition. So some of my colleagues, the website is called Just Transition Alliance. So it's one of those things we're not going to shut down your plant and then you guys sit unemployed for 15 years and we'll be back. We're going to pay to train you for the new jobs that are coming. So you don't have a break in your paycheck, and the new job will restore and again, bring you whole. You can stay where you are and you'll still be able to pay your family. All of the railroad companies lobby. Because even when Canada, when the town blew up, that train came from the United States. And then the court found that the government was at fault. The government of Canada said, well, it's too expensive, we're not doing that. So they just wrote everybody a check. A town blew up at 1 o'clock in the morning. It's frustrating because those companies have access to politicians and we don't. But again, there's a reason we call them bomb trains. And with climate change, the tracks are warping, tornadoes could hit them, the heat could just make it ignite. And again, even if the PFAS wasn't on the train, it may have been in something the firefighters used to put the fire out. Sometimes PFAS can come from just chemicals mixing together and it becomes a byproduct. So because they still won't tell us everything that was in there. We may have some byproduct PFAS that's coming into that stream, and Louisville Water Company and in Northeast Kentucky, they're like, we'll be fine. We don't know. Because again, we don't test, the tests haven't been
Yeah,
developed.
the city of Ashland literally put out a statement that was like, your drinking water is fine, you should keep drinking it. And I don't know.
Yeah. No, I mean, no, that's not uncommon. That's not, and that's when you take the glass of water to the meeting and say, here, have a drink, have a glass of water. Would you drink it? It's just unfortunate, but that's where you hold the media accountable and saying, stop just accepting that and ask a follow-up question. And go speak to some researchers in the universities, because again, it shouldn't be on the communities to throw a rock into water on social media to see the chemicals come up. It shouldn't take a child in a respirator. It shouldn't take somebody getting a tumor. Like, enough is enough, right? Somebody's got to tell these chemical companies no, especially if we're going to keep taking these trains across the continent.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
Continue.
No, I just, want to echo all of that, and say that you're never going to not have lobbyists. I mean, that's just not going to ever happen until we get money out of our campaigns. And once that happens, then maybe you'll see a fewer lobbyists. But I think it's really dangerous. And I think what is happening with that explosion, with everything that is going on, and the fact that they were telling even those communities that everything is fine, and the people were like, everything's not fine, I'm feeling sick, I'm having these symptoms, the air is not okay, like nothing is okay, you're telling us it's okay, and I can see with all of my senses that things are not okay, right? So when your government is doing that in the face of everything that you can see and smell and taste and hear, and feel, then you're gonna have a serious problem with trying to convince them that they have your best interests at heart in any kind of crisis in the future. And so I think it is very concerning, because even right where it happened, right, the communities right where it happened, they're being told this. There are numbers being thrown around about levels, or there were, everything's fine. We're under this level for this, we're under this. We're fine with this metric over here in terms of wind and this and the water, and it's all completely made up. Because there's no way they were able to tell all of that in that amount of time, with the levels and the impact that this is going to have on human beings and things that are alive, on plants and animals and it is very, very concerning that this is the reaction. But I guess this is the tack that we should expect when things like this happen. It's happened before. This is just a very brazen and egregious thing that we're seeing. And it probably happens all the time, but you don't hear about it on a smaller level in different communities, with no media coverage. And I think that we need to be very mindful again and trust ourselves in our communities, where if we see something is not right, we need a way to reach the people that are in charge and the people that are responsible. And that is going to take legislation. It's going to take people being brave, especially lawmakers, being braver than, worrying about their next reelection. And I think that is, the more awareness that people have on an individual level, the more that will sort of work its way up to legislator and policymaker awareness. And the more that happens, the faster the change will happen.
Thank you so much for excellent points all around. Representative Cole Carney, appreciate your making the time to be with us. I know the House of Representatives has already had its session for the day, so appreciate that you were able to take the time to join us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So coming up next, we have three different student groups, our collaborators for these meetings. They're each going to have approximately 12 minutes each to talk about their advocacy work and offer some of their tips. So up first is someone we've already heard from. So we're familiar with Cassie Woolley. She comes representing the Science and Policy Outreach Group at the University of Louisville. And I will turn it over now to Cassie.
Had myself muted. Hello, thank you. So can you all see my presentation screen? Let me see if I can get slides to.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. And then let me start presentation. Where is that? Awesome. So I'll go through this quickly because I know we don't have very much time, but so we're the University of Louisville Science Policy and Outreach Group, which just abbreviates to SPOG. So we have a lot of different facets and dip our hands in a lot of things, but our science policy is something we're very proud of, and we're trying to get more upped. And so the presentation that I have is just encouraging science policy engagement, because something that we really strive to do, we're based on our health sciences campus, is to make people aware of what science policy is and how they can easily get involved. So why even bother to participate in science policy? So our government's best whenever we participate in the process, and it really is easier than ever. So you can write, email, call your elected officials. If you were at the last meeting, you'll know Rob went over some of the ways to do that. To explain how an issue affects you or your profession, express support or opposition to a proposed bill, and then educate officials on the issues that you're an expert in. So our group's a graduate student organization, so we have a lot of future scientists in different health science degrees that are poised to educate officials on issues that we're more expert in. So the things that we've been doing on our to push for involvement is each year we do something called We Heart Policy Week, which this is the end of. So it's Valentine's week. Last year, our big event was a letter writing workshop where we catered coffee and desserts and did policy candygrams, as well as allowed people to write letters at the station, or gave them instructions on how to write letters. But the thing that we found was that even though we had a lot of people interested, there was very low follow through. So something we focused on this year was making it really easy and really quick. So we did cookies, coffee, and congressional updates. So we again catered coffee and desserts, but as you can see down here in the bottom, it was a much quicker station where we just did a quick science policy overview. We had kind of a spiel of like what to expect, how you can get involved, how you can contact your legislators, and then we had top bills of concern. And we had 50 plus attendees for this event, and there was actually really high engagement, because if we found that if people could talk to us as they were just sort of grabbing a cookie, grabbing coffee, only a couple minutes, they actually were much more engaged than whenever we were asking them to write letters. And they cared a lot more to stop and whenever we discussed the bills that were actually being presented, which is something we didn't do last year. Last year, we had a much longer list rather than a few targeted bills. People were much more likely to be engaged. So the four quote unquote bills, but 3 topics that we focused on this year. And I'm sad that we actually didn't focus on PFOS, but we decided to have the primary bill being an act relating to water fluoridation programs, because we are, again, on the health sciences campus right by the dental school. So a lot of the students passing by were dental students. And that's the act that's trying to take fluoridation out of the drinking water and put the onus on local areas to decide whether or not they want to have water fluoridation. And then the next 2 bills were the acts relating to COVID-19 vaccine requirements. And then the last bill, which was an act relating to children's health, which prohibits gender transition programs for anyone under the age of 18, which again, we're the health sciences campus. We have both med students and dental students. And we believe or I believe, and SPOG as an organization, we don't take a stance because that's something the way our university does, but individual students were proposing that should be something that's kept between the physician and the patient. And so we presented these bills. We gave a really quick spiel. And the way we did that was a cookie and let me talk at you. So we would offer the goods that we had, present the 4 bills. We typically would identify a connection that the student has. So if they had a medical student badge, we'd be like, oh, this is a bill you might be interested in, because if they had a dental student badge, we'll be like, did you hear that they're trying to make it no longer a requirement to have fluoridation in the water? Summarize the 4 bills and the importance, and then give them a handout, which is shown here, and email them this handout, as well as a longer list of bills and a link to the KAS website. And it was really simple. Again, we had great success with this, and this was great for getting people who typically wouldn't be involved in science policy involved, because even though they were passing by really quickly and they might not necessarily usually have the time, they had the time to grab a cookie. So they had the time to listen to us and explain. And then because of the handout, and even a couple people actually called while they were there, we had a pretty good engagement with that. And then for the more passionate, so a couple people who were much more interested, who once we proposed and told them that there were these bills of interest, and they said, oh, that's something I'm actually very interested in, being engaged with, we would then give them a framework for constructing a letter. And this is something that I won't go over too in detail because it's most people know how to construct a letter, but it's a kind of like a 3.5 essay format. So we have the introductory paragraph, body paragraphs, and conclusion. So here is our letter sample that we gave out and that we give to people who are more interested. So if you've never written a professional or letter to a policymaker, this is kind of a general structure from the Federation of American Societies of Experimental Biology, which is actually where a former SPOG director now works. So you have your date, your legislators being addressed, which these are the 3 or 4 legislatures that are on the Appropriations Committee, because this was about budgeting last year. The honorable, and then legislator's name, chair, Appropriations Committee, and then Senate. And then reading an introductory paragraph that summarizes the purpose and the reason why. Body paragraph, which provides detail and typically a personal experience, because something that we found and that I think most people believe is that if you can give personal experiences and make it more personal, legislatures are more likely to respond to that. So there's 2 paragraphs of body and then a conclusion, which just summarizes the whole purpose of the letter again, and then what exactly we want them to do. So here it says, please redouble your efforts to finalize the fiscal year 2022 budget. And then sincerely, your signature, and then your qualifications, quote unquote. So this is much more for the passionate, but we gave similar instructions for people who were giving the phone call, kind of a similar, where like you can call, introduce yourself, your purpose, what you want to do, provide details of why this bill is important to you, why you want them to vote a certain way or not push forward a bill or not push forward a bill, and then a conclusion of like, again, what you want them to do. And so that's pretty much all I have. And I just said, however you're involved or work to get others involved, our voices can help to kill a bill in committee or force it through. And enough voices against will cause it to remain just a bill on Capitol Hill and not a law, or we can advocate for it to become a lucky one and become a bill, become a law. So if you've ever seen Schoolhouse Rock, this is the I'm Just a Bill. I won't click on it because I'm not exactly sure if the audio will share, but it's a really fun video and song that gives an overview of how bills become laws and where we can stop them, which is primarily when they're in committee. And yeah, it's not going to play. That's it. That's all I have. And I went through that really quickly because I know we're running a little behind.
Thank you very much for that. I was just going to say, Cassie, that I think it would be great if we worked together, and other groups on the call, if we worked closely together on science policy. We could especially use a little help on health policy. So
yeah, we could use a help on environmental policy, because I know very little about environmental policy, but our group, again, we're all health science students, so we know a lot more about that.
Well, all right. Well, we should work together then. All right.
Also on the note that you are looking for more expertise on environmental policy, that's the perfect segue into our next speaker. So I thank you so much, Cassie, for your informative and engaging presentation today. And we'll move on to our next speaker. We are joined by Catherine Smith, who is with the Kentucky Student Environmental Coalition. And I believe that Catherine, let me ask you, do you prefer to go by Kat?
Yeah, you can call me Kat.
Okay. Kat is going to talk about her group's work on Bernheim Forest and the issue there of the possibility of a portion of that natural land being bisected by a utility line. So Kat, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you all so much for the time and attention today. I'm really excited about how many people are here. So I'm going to go pretty quickly as well. I'm going to just talk a little bit about the Kentucky Student Environmental Coalition, hop into our work around the current LG&E pipeline being proposed in Bullitt County, some ways that you can get involved, and then I'm going to share a couple of resources in the chat afterwards. So yeah, I'm Kat. I am a state organizer with the Kentucky Student Environmental Coalition. Got involved originally as a student, just like many of you, in my my campus's environmental group. We were doing a campaign to get our university to adopt a climate action plan and create actionable steps to reducing their carbon emissions. So CASEC, now I'm a staff with CASEC, and CASEC works to network young people throughout the state and educate on a lot of different environmental issues. Specifically, Monica, I love that you mentioned a just transition. We really try to do a lot of education around what a just transition is, how environmental justice intersects with labor justice, racial justice, housing, health, all these different issues, and how they overlap a lot more than maybe sometimes we're led to believe. So we do that, and then we really try to do a lot of leadership development. So you know, I'm really glad that we've had folks that are scientists speaking, legislators, other grassroots organizations, student groups, and essentially what we do is try to build out people's ability to be an advocate, even if you're just an everyday citizen and maybe don't have a decision-making role yet. So everyone here totally can play a role in this, and also can play a role in this specific campaign that we are currently running. I'm going to share my screen really quick. Yeah, what's going on with the LG&E pipeline? Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Awesome. Let me get this slide going. All right, so the LG&E pipeline. This is a high pressure methane gas pipeline that would be going through Bullitt County. It would be going through Bernheim Forest, which is a really great resource that a lot of folks love. It's in the Louisville area. Hopefully you've gone before to see the giants. But this is a pipeline that is being proposed with the majority of the high pressure methane gas in this pipeline being used by a company, Jim Beam, for the first 5 years. Jim Beam is a multi-million-dollar bourbon company. And we know that for the first 2 years, 100% of this gas would be used by Jim Beam. The 3 years after that would be 95%. So we know that the utility that is in this pipeline wouldn't actually be used by everyday Kentuckians, like many of us here today. There's a lot of impacts from this pipeline, as there are impacts with every pipeline. And just to go back, we call our group No New Pipelines because we really believe that to start transitioning to a more sustainable future, we don't need any new fossil fuel infrastructure. So who are the folks that are impacted? One, local landowners. You know, as we talked about how the majority of Kentucky is rural Kentuckians who, you know, throughout Kentucky's history have been left behind by corporations. We really want to advocate for a lot of local landowners, farmers who are going to be the most impacted by this. And oftentimes, you know, depend on the health of the land to have a livelihood. You know, this totally intersects with labor and their ability to, you know, take care of themselves and their family. The other thing that we know about high pressure methane gas pipelines is that they increase the likelihood of fires. In 2019, we saw this with Lincoln County. There was a gas explosion that ended up killing some folks and ruining a lot of people's lives in many ways. The land that this pipeline would be going through is prone to landslides, is a floodplain, has a karst topography, which is, if you're familiar with geography, that's why Kentucky has such a robust, amazing cave system. And so all of these are going to create a more dangerous situation where the likelihood of a pipeline failure is going to be increased. Also, rural areas don't always have the infrastructure for emergency plans. You know, maybe there's one road in, one road out. So say that the road washes out, you can't get it, or get out. So we really want to advocate for the folks that are directly in the line of this pipeline, those frontline communities, just like Monica mentioned earlier. And then also, you know, LG&E and KU customers. I don't know about you all. I don't even live in Louisville. I live in Lexington, but I pay a KU bill. And so back in 2017, the Public Service Commission approved LG&E to put the cost of this project onto ratepayers, like everyday people just like us. So that was back when this project was estimated at 25 million. And because of advocates within government as well as everyday people coming together, the fact that this pipeline has not been passed yet and approved to be constructed, that is a win, you know, and that's actually caused the cost of this pipeline to go up all the way to about $80 million. Again, I don't know about you all. I don't want to be paying for a pipeline that I don't even get to use the utilities for, and is going to continue to contribute to the current climate crisis that our state is already seeing. So Bernheim is another really amazing resource that would be highly impacted by this pipeline. One, it goes through a parcel of their land that was deeded at the state and federal level as a conservation easement. The reason it was deeded this way is because there are multiple endangered animals, plants on this property that need to be protected. As we're talking about policy and ways that you can get involved, you know, one of those ways is some of these species are not, there's a few that aren't classified as endangered yet, but are globally imperiled. The bluff vertigo, it's known in less than 30 populations in the whole world. We need folks that are going to move that classification to endangered. So if that's something that, if that's your jam, there's lots of organizations, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, EPA, Center for Biological Diversity. These are great organizations to get involved with, specifically around advocacy around that. And also, this is just like a really, really amazing resource. You know, we talked about health earlier. We know that access to green spaces is good for our mental health, our physical health. You know, we saw this during the pandemic. And we know that they're a place for us to connect and make great connections with other people in our community. So this is something that also really needs to be protected. You know, water, we know pipelines are going to have a huge impact on water. The Lower Salt Creek is one of the cleanest creeks in the area. We want to do preventative work to protect that instead of having to do cleanup after the fact. And we also know that because it's at the headwater of these streams, that there's a concern of wastewater discharge flowing into other streams as well. And then also Center for Biological Diversity. Thankfully, because of this organization's advocacy work, they were able to have both U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the Army Corps of Engineers pull and rescind the permits that they had given to LG&E, that LG&E needs to build this pipeline because they weren't actually complying with laws around the Clean Water Act or laws protecting these federally endangered bats. Look at those guys, they're so cute. We definitely need to protect them and the people that would be impacted by this. And a lot of these species, you know, don't have a voice to be to advocate with. So that's where people like you and I come in. And then also really quickly, you know, we know that pipelines, there's no spill-proof pipeline. You know, we see a ton of different spills that have happened with oil pipelines. As I mentioned, Kentucky has had multiple issues. You know, in 2019, there's that Lincoln County rupture, and we want to do the preventative work to keep that from happening. We want to protect these communities. And then also zooming out, you know, so the thing is by stopping this pipeline, it makes it harder for future pipelines to be going through Kentucky. This isn't just about Bullitt County, but Kentucky as a whole, and also even beyond Kentucky. You know, when if this were to go through and this conservation easement was kind of thrown to the wind, there are other companies that are looking at this case on, okay, cool, y'all got through a conservation easement, how are we going to do that? So by stopping it now, we can keep it from happening in the future. So we definitely want to do that. Also, I want to say, you know, a lot of the times people can feel like these issues are so big. They're like, how can we do this? There've been multiple successful pipeline fights in Kentucky done by grassroots efforts, by everyday people like us, as well as with the help of environmental lawyers, legislators, scientists, many of the folks that we've heard from today. So it kind of takes all of us. I can promise every single person in this room has something that they can offer to these issues. And one resource I'm going to share out is a documentary about the Bluegrass Pipeline that was defeated in 2013. That was something that got me interested in this work in the first place. And it was a really great example of how we can continue to fight these things. So there's a lot of different ways to get involved. We have a petition, we have a coalition. Bring this issue to other groups you're a part of. If you all want a presentation on this, if you are with a student group, with a friend group, with a church group, anything, we are happy to do that. We are also asking ally organizations to host letter writing events. We have all of the materials for that. Mobilize your neighbors, stuff like that. And then we also, are going to be doing some, we're trying to get a resolution passed in Metro City Council in Louisville. So that's another way to plug in. And then there's a lot of different organizations. Here are a bunch of organizations that are involved. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I know that I just threw a lot at you all, but kind of wanted to open it up for questions really quick. Cool. Well, if y'all have any, where are the PSC letter writing drives? Yes, so I'm going to share that on here. That is another thing that, thank you for saying that, because it was actually something I wanted to mention. So Public Service Commission is who does a lot of regulations around our utilities. They're the ones that allow utilities to put these costs on ratepayers. So a really important way that you can advocate for these things is to show up to those PSC meetings and provide public comment. The PSC actually cannot do their own research, so they need citizens to provide this information to them. And so that is a really, really important step for engagement and for getting the right information to these decision makers. And so I'm gonna drop in the chat. There's a website that has a bunch of information about this issue, and then has all the information that you need on letter writing. We currently have a letter drafted for Kent Chandler of the PSC, Andy Bashir, some of the CEO of LG&E, as well as PPL, which is their parent company. And then also, we don't have it up yet, but the next step that LG&E is probably going to push for is trying to get re-permitted for this permits from Fish and Wildlife as well as Army Corps. We need to keep putting pressure on them to, maintain their stance and not give them those permits again. So writing Fish and Wildlife, writing Army Corps, those are two really great options. I know there's so much information to this campaign. I could talk for hours about this. So I'm gonna also just throw in this doc that has some of those main facts. If you want to chat at all, I'm gonna put my email in the chat. Because we really, really want to have folks in the room that are doing a lot of this advocacy work and working with us. And there's a lot of different ways to plug in. We need artists, we need speakers, we need people who love making memes and want to share this information on social media. As folks talked about earlier, we know that a lot of the time media companies aren't covering these things, and so sometimes we gotta push these stories out and get those personal experiences out there. It shouldn't be on community members to do this work, and also this is kind of the situation that we're in a lot of the time. And so a lot of our work is about like building that agency, building that power for everyday people.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Kat, we appreciate it much. Your work, your sharing the information with us, and as well as your contact info, so we can all follow up with you for additional info. We're going to move on now to our final group that's going to offer information today. Jeremy Davis is with the Kentucky Advocates for Science Policy and Research out of the University of Kentucky. And Jeremy, if you are ready, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about your group's advocacy work.
Sure. Hi. I'm Jeremy. I'm the current president of CASPER, which is Kentucky Advocates for Science Policy and Research. I'm just going to share my screen real quick, talk briefly, and I'm just going to share a little bit, just briefly. Can you all see this presentation?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna have to switch it over to another screen in a sec also, but I just want to tell you a little bit about what our group does, kind of what our approach is, and how it has gone, at least this year. Make sure I pull up the chat so I can see anything. So we're CASPER. I didn't come up with the name, but we're Kentucky Advocates for Science Policy and Research. We're basically a group of graduate and professional students at UK. We're open to undergrads as well, but as far as I know, we've never had one in our group. But mostly graduate students as well as professional scientists. I'm a postdoc, for instance, who dedicate some of their time to talking about science policy issues that are currently relevant in Kentucky state legislature. So what are our overall group goals and approach is that we're looking for active participation in the current Kentucky legislative session and advocating for science sound legislation. And the way we do that is we target science relevant bills on the current legislative agenda, usually by looking at bill requests sometime in the fall, looking at what's coming up, maybe having a little bit of a pulse on what might be discussed in the active session, and then going and talking with legislators about those bills. And then finally, we do some career development for early career scientists who are also policy curious, which is pretty much describes everyone in my group. So thank you for hosting this workshop because it's a major part of that goal, at least. So I will actually jump really quickly into like how, so like, what is it that my group does on a yearly basis? So what we would do, and in fact, I end up giving this list to the legislators we talked to so far, is we drum up a list of bills that we would advocate as scientists for or against, trying to, there's been some discussion in this workshop about being objective, being impartial, but we at least try to present as being objective because we feel like it gets across a little better at times. And we drum up a list of bills that we would advocate for or against. But we don't necessarily talk about all of these bills, though we make ourselves available to be contacted about them. We usually target a select number of these bills to talk about in a little bit more length. And then what we do is we create one-page briefs, which I'll show you in a moment, to give to legislators to advocate specifically for certain bills that we're talking about. So for instance, we have 6 bills this year that we had briefs about, or really 4 briefs in 4 major topics relating to 6 bills, but there's more, including the PFAS bill here that we at least put on our flyers. And then what we do is we create one-pagers, and I'll show you that in a second. But before that, I want to just highlight my group here because we went and did 2 Hill days so far in February this year and January. And last year we did them all virtually. So it was really great to actually be there in person. I think all of us got a lot of certainly career development as well as like active engagement in legislative session. So this is just my small group. I just want to shout them out. I think they're all here. And each of them basically took a main topic that they prepared a brief for and we spoke about with legislators. So I'm actually going to share a different screen. do, sorry, real quick, just to show you what these one pagers look like. Can you see this now? Should be a picture about the right to healthy environment, which is current bill. So basically what we do is, and you'll find this, when we went to Frankfurt this year, we weren't the only group to have these types of one pagers. They're a pretty common thing. If you're an advocacy group, you walk in, you're talking with legislators, you want to hand them something so that they remember both you as well as your group's topic about what it is you were prattling on about for the 15 to 30 minutes that you have with them. So this is an example of one that I prepared for House Bill 140, which is the right to healthy environment in Kentucky, which I think is an excellent bill. And basically, like, the goal here is, and I didn't have a template or anything for this, but if you want, I can send plenty of these examples to you. Basically, the goal is to be as simple and straightforward as possible, and in a very short amount of space, is to give the main reasons why you want legislators to remember the bills and think about them critically of voting for or against, depending on what you're advocating for. So this one, I highlighted all of the wonderful natural resources, as well as the economic contributions that those resources have here in Kentucky. Because it's important, if we're talking not only to the Democrats, but also to the Republicans, to get them on board with why this bill is something that is beneficial for everyone, and not just like a Democratic agenda, which is a lot of what some of the science policy is seen as. So this is one that I prepared. And again, it's kind of simple. I highlight some major numbers at the top. I give a little information, but not too much to read. And then at the bottom here, I'll have something that I'll actually physically highlight in person, which is the action we're asking the legislator to do. Hey, we want you to support this bill if you hear it come up, that type of thing. I'll give you some more examples. This is by Haley, who's on this call. She did a great job with a really good visual one-pager about harm reduction centers here in Kentucky. So it's about, I don't have enough time to go over all these bills, sorry, but basically this bill is about harm reduction centers and drug use and fentanyl strips as well. Some legislative, some bills relating to that. And again, I can send these later. But she did a great job making a very nice visual layout that, again, we can present to the legislator, and as we're talking to them, they can read it and see exactly what we're talking about. Give them all of the main facts that they can use as ammo to support whatever we're advocating for, or maybe convince them if they're unconvinced. And I will say, I'll talk a little bit about how the bills went in a second, but this one is from Sam Malone, who's also on the call, or at least was. This is about firefighter suicide prevention. It's a bill about PTSD and firefighters and basically giving additional medical support for them. This was a very popular bill. We did not have to do a lot of hard advocating for it, to be honest. And actually, we when we walked into a bunch of them, some of the firefighters had been there right before us and also had a one-pager about this same bill. So you can kind of see how these one-pagers are something that they're very used to seeing in the legislature. And we're not the only group that will be coming through and giving out these one-pagers, for instance. And we think it has a pretty sizable impact on being able to convince people or remind people of certain actions and bills that are on the legislative agenda. And the last one I'll highlight, which is by Madison and Caleb, is about accessibility to feminine hygiene products. There have been a number of bills on this, actually. The two that we highlighted here were providing free feminine hygiene products in schools, and the second was removing taxation, luxury taxation of feminine hygiene products in Kentucky. These are both public health concerns, something that, there are a lot of underserved counties in Kentucky and a lot of places below the federal poverty line that have trouble getting women's feminine hygiene products. So this is a public health concern. It's relevant to science policy. We went and we advocated for it to a bunch of legislators this year. So this is kind of our approach. this is the way we like to do things. We like to make these one pagers and really go and get engaged in the policy actually in Frankfurt. So the one I didn't pull up is on water fluoridation. That's another main topic that we've been discussing, and maybe the most relevant one that we are actually getting to this cycle. I'll stop sharing my screen actually. So I just wanted to say, like, we ended up meeting with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We've 7. So far, we've met with 7 legislators. All of them are related to Fayette County. One, because it's way easier as a UK group who's based in Fayette County to meet with Fayette County legislators. A number of politicians just simply didn't get back to us. Another, we're trying to add some via Zoom that might be the most relevant people to talk to. And I'm sort of running out of time. So one thing I'll say is that positive outcomes we've seen so far is that we talked with Ruth Ann Palumbo, representative from Fayette County. She signed on as a sponsor to every bill we talked with her about. So that was pretty cool, pretty tangible outcome we had. None of the other bills have seen movement so far. I will say the ones out of the most relevant that we were looking at, the water fluoridation bill is maybe the one I'm most concerned about because it's been getting a little bit of attention, not great attention. And in fact, more sponsors have signed on to that bill. So that's something we may want to talk to KAS as well as SPOG maybe about. Might be one of the more relevant pieces of legislature that actually will get to be heard and voted on this session. And it's, yeah, they're trying to basically make water fluoridation optional at the county level. That's problematic because we are 43rd in dental and oral health in the United States. So we can't let that happen. That's most of what I got. I'm open to questions. We spoke with primarily Democrats, not by design, but just by who responded to us. We also spoke with some Republicans, including Killian Timoney, who I think was a really, really great meeting for us. He's a very moderate Republican, had a lot of things to say about how he felt his colleagues would or wouldn't respond to some things, which is very helpful, as well as certain of our bills that he was like, look, I've got no problem with this one. You know, I'll support this, or maybe I need to speak with my Democratic colleagues about sponsoring this bill because oftentimes in our legislature, we need a Republican to sponsor things because they're just a super minority. The Dems are a super minority. And with that, I guess I'll open up to questions. Our group's a bit different from some of the others here. We really just try and focus on getting some experience and advocating for certain bills and trying to be just another voice added to the conversation about the most relevant science issues on a given year in legislation. So that is all. I will give it over to whoever or any questions you might have. So,
well, Jeremy, I did want to encourage that maybe your group may also want to look at how to get scientists onto federal committees. So you nominate someone and then you need comments of support if they can get past the first round, because being in the federal committees, you're advising the EPA, you're advising the other agencies, and that's going to have an impact on the state of Kentucky as well. But we know that chemical industries usually get their reps on those committees, and I've been on a committee, and I'm sure others have.
How do you do that?
Okay, so unfortunately, you kind of have to go to their boring websites, and this is really boring, and check and see when they announce a proposed seeking nominations for a committee. It will usually go along with them about to announce a proposed rule change or a new policy change. So you'll have to go to the federal, I never say that word, registrar, registrar. But if you go to like the EPA site and look at committees, you can find the word I can't say, and they'll give you the process, the due dates. But I think it would be wonderful for having more people from Kentucky, because on the committee I was on, They forgot about indoor plumbing and thought people were just exposed through swimming in a lake. They forgot about groundwater. And it was just like, and the chemical industry was like, well, the smoke screen's too tall, so it's not sending pollution anywhere. So we need some, yeah, so we need some scientists who aren't just blatant liars in the room. But you can email me, I'll put it in the chat. And then can tell you about how I got on there. And it is paid.
Thank you. That'd be appreciated.
Yeah, they do pay you, so that's good.
That's good. Yeah, I will say, like, definitely our group is, because we're all students doing other things, we're all limited on time at times and on a volunteer basis. So we try and target, like I said, Kentucky legislature at minimum. But in the past, we've also spoken to federal lawmakers from Kentucky to advocate for legislature. So I'd be really interested in looking into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. The way your group has presented your issues looks super effective, and I'm glad you were able to share that with us. We're out of time, but this conversation is sort of the beginning of more conversations to come. I'm going to stay in touch with the group. We'll be sending out emails, sharing contact information to everyone who's been a part of these meetings, as well as the certificates designating participants as Kentucky Science Advocates. So greatly appreciate all who have taken part. And let me ask Trent, since Trent Garrison leads our education and advocacy efforts, did you have any closing comments or questions, Trent?
Yeah, just really quickly, this is a wonderful group of people that we have on the call today, and we're more than happy to work together on all of these issues. Like I said at the beginning, when people were trickling in, I don't know if everybody caught that, but we meet every other week, Wednesdays at 12:30, and people just kind of come and go as they need. So you all are extremely welcome to join us. We can't emphasize that enough. Anytime we have more eyes on the bills, that's helpful to us. So, you're welcome to work together. We're happy to help and support you on anything that's science related bills. And like I said earlier as well, anything health related, we could use the extra help when it comes to that. Feel free to reach out to me or Rob, and, happy to give you more information on that. I'll put my email address in the chat. That's it for me. Thank you very much for being a part of this.